Hello and welcome back to the Final Lap podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined, as always, by Sam. We got plenty to get to today from a chaotic Mexican Grand Prix. First off, though, Sam, how are you doing? How did you enjoy the race this weekend where we had a championship flip in the favor of Lando Norris now?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. It's a lot of action this weekend. I felt like this was probably the most action-packed race we've had in a while. So I'm anxious to talk about it. Got a lot to talk about. Championship lead changing, like you mentioned. Plenty of controversy, but also a lot of great drives as well. So I'm excited to get to it.
Yeah, a little bit of everything here this weekend, I think. First, I think we have to start, though, with Lando Norris's dominant performance. Wins the race by about half a minute over second place, Charles Leclerc in second, and then Max Verstappen in third place to round out the podium. But it was always Lando's day once he made it through turn one unscathed, was able to get through without getting caught up in the madness there in turn one, 4 wide behind him, or 4 wide, I guess, including him. But once he was able to get through that, he just drove away from the field the rest of the day. And, there wasn't really much anybody else could do. I think he seemed to have, pure pace over everybody else the whole weekend. Whether that was in qualifying or race pace, whatever it was, he seemed to have all the answers this weekend. Kind of a Max-like dominant performance this time around for Lando, though.
Yeah, it was. This is a really tone-setting performance potentially for the rest of the championship battle. I thought Lando was superb all weekend. It seemed like the McLaren was in pretty good form this weekend as a car, and Oscar wasn't able to take advantage of that, but Lando certainly was. Now he's the championship leader, and he absolutely deserves to be in that spot at the moment over Oscar, who's really been struggling for a few races now. So Lando, this is definitely his weekend, and a very impressive drive start to finish.
Yeah, I know obviously Lando's been the better of the two McLarens for the last handful of races here, but I do wonder why at this track in particular the difference between the two was so large. I think we've seen Oscar finish worse than what we saw here. He was okay in the race, but the gap between the two McLaren drivers just on pace was so massive. Around a half a second in qualifying pace, and then obviously you saw what Lando did in the race, just running away, while Oscar qualifying was poor and had to fight his way through the pack just to gain a couple spots. But I wonder why this track in particular was so good for Lando, and yet so off for Oscar, where obviously they're in the same car at this point, and usually with these guys, they've been so evenly matched. Even when one has an advantage at a track they just like more or whatever, the margin is still pretty thin. It's still a couple tenths here or there that makes the difference, but this was just, purely dominant from Lando when it comes to, the rest of the field, but also just that head-to-head teammate battle.
It was, yeah, and these guys have been quite literally even all year. Obviously, the 1-point championship gap, but also a 10-10 draw in qualifying, I believe, at the moment. But Lando outqualifies Oscar here by 0.6. I mean, that's a pretty massive gap, especially for two teammates where we're not used to the gap. That's more of a Max to Yuki kind of gap than it is Lando to Oscar or vice versa. So, I mean, just really not his day. And, this really hasn't been his track historically either. I mean, his other 2 seasons in Formula One, he finished 8th both times in Mexico. So just not his place, I guess. And it's certainly a bad time in the championship to get a bad run of tracks. Lando now taking the lead and looks to be in the driver's seat here for the rest of the way to come, at least from an odds perspective.
Yeah, we talked about that last week. This kind of run of tracks at the end, just not Oscar's specialty. Um, Obviously, not all of them are at elevation. I wonder if the way that the car behaves at elevation is just something that Oscar doesn't like, or if that maybe has something to do with it, because that's the one glaring difference at this track compared to really the rest of the calendar is the elevation. It's so much higher than any other track, so the car is going to behave differently. The racing is going to be a little bit different. I mean, the track I don't think is too much different to what we would see on a typical like F1 track. There's a few technical sections. There's a long straight. There's not really any big sweeping corners. That would be the one difference that I would say that this track doesn't really have. That maybe would be something that where Oscar would look to capitalize there. So I don't know if it is maybe the altitude part of it, the just the track conditions, the track layout, just something that he doesn't like. It just can't find the grip here. Maybe I don't know what it is, but it's definitely been a glaring part of his Formula One resume so far that hasn't been great. And Lando has been able to figure that out and win by the margin that he did here this weekend.
Yeah, and this is obviously a small sample size, but last year he really struggled down the stretch on these tracks after a pretty good summer. Getting his first couple wins in F1. Last year, his last 4 tracks he finished 8th, 7th, 3rd, and 10th, and that does include the sprint win in Qatar. Which was really nice for him. And Lando wasn't amazing in that stretch either, except for Abu Dhabi. But he is going to have to do well here on some tracks that he's never really done well at, especially the likes of Las Vegas and Sao Paulo as well. It's a big ask, and these are very different kinds of tracks, and certainly not going to be easy for Oscar here down the stretch. I wouldn't count him out by any means. Obviously, 1 point is nothing, until you get to the final race. But certainly a lot of red flags here coming up for Oscar after what was such a good summer and even spring before that.
Yeah, I think I saw, in qualifying and head-to-head in the race, it was pretty even up until the summer break, like you said, or up until around, I think, Hungary. It was pretty even between the two, the slight edge to Oscar, I think, in both categories. And then since it's been pretty lopsided towards Lando, and he's used that to gain his way back into the championship battle. And we'll get to the championship as a whole and more in a minute. But first, one of the bigger things I think at the end of the race that I took away was how the fans reacted to Lando after the race. You heard the boos coming from that stadium section when they were talking to him post-race, and a little bit on the podium celebration as well. I wasn't really able to, figure out why exactly they were booing Lando. If it was just that there weren't a lot of Lando fans maybe in that area, more Max fans maybe down there, or more Oscar fans. I'm not sure exactly why there'd be more of either of those two, those fans in Mexico, but maybe that had something to do with it. I'm not exactly sure, but it was definitely odd to see that after the race at a place like Mexico, where I don't know of any, like ties that Lando has to that area that would make the fans down there not like him as much. So it just kind of, it felt really weird to me. Just not sure if you knew anything else about that as to why maybe those boos were loud, or if it was just they wanted a closer race and he won by 30 seconds and they were a little upset about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might have been part of it. I think a lot of it comes down to just the whole papaya rules and this idea of maybe potential favoritism towards Lando. Whether or not those ideas, are actually true. Obviously, that's something we've said a lot, that we think it's mostly been fairly evenly called at McLaren, but I think that is something that's percolating in a lot of fans' minds. And I also think we've talked a lot about how many fans are swaying back towards Max now, that how many fans want to see him win and see him
Yeah.
kind of make this massive comeback and make history. So I don't know if it was a personal against Lando. Like, it's not, like you mentioned, Mexico's. There's not really any connections there, I would
Mhm.
think, that would lead to massive amounts of booing. I think, more of it is just people rooting for Max, or people just kind of being tired of this back and forth that we've seen at McLaren all year, and all the team politics there. And a lot of people see Lando as a beneficiary of that, whether or not it's true.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It plays a lot into that the papaya rules, and I think going off that as well, I, the past couple seasons, whether it was last year with Lando not being able to win that championship when a lot of people felt he had a better car, or this year with the way that the rules between teammates have been laid out, I think things have gotten pretty polarizing around Lando. I feel like at this point, F1 fans they either love him or they really don't like him. I think it's kind of a definitely been split, the fan base on Lando the past couple seasons. And I think maybe when you get people in a big stadium section like that, people start booing, and then it just kind of builds on from there. So I think it's kind of also building off what you said with the papaya rules. I think that things have just gotten really polarized on social media a lot as well, around Lando. Just with the way that some of the things the last few years have gone, and then also just some remarks he's made off the track as well, that people haven't really taken well either at certain points. I don't really have any feelings on those comments off the track, and they've all really been about racing, so it's not really anything extra. But yeah, I think that's probably part of that polarization as well.
Yeah, and I don't think it's anything Mexico specific, because we've seen it at other places as well. After Monza, he got some boos,
Mm-hmm.
and the Italian fans were even cheering for Max
Yeah.
there over Lando. So
Yeah.
I think it's just people kind of tired of the way the season has gone. Obviously, it's shaping up to be a better
Mm-hmm.
finish, I think, than most of the season has gone. So maybe some people are coming back around, but I think it's just a general. I think hate's far too strong of a word, because I don't think people really
Mm-hmm.
despise him or McLaren on that level. But I think people are maybe just a little bit tired of seeing them at the top, and just uh, the way that they've carried themselves, I guess, while they're at the top. I think people
Mm-hmm.
are kind of ready to maybe see a Max resurgence, or see someone like Ferrari or Mercedes back on top at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Sebastian Vettel got booed, pretty famously a lot towards the end of his run. I feel like Max has gotten booed at points when he was dominating. Lewis as well probably got booed some. So I think when you're a part of a team, or you're a driver that's been dominant for multiple seasons and winning a lot of races, um, the fans either they really support you, or they start to turn on you and want someone else to win and see that success elsewhere. So I think that's a good part of it too. Let's look at the championship a little bit more broadly. Just with what we've gone through now, we're down to 4 races left. Lando now in the lead by 1 point. With the win this weekend, big kind of title flipping weekend, with Lando dominating, and Oscar pretty far off the pace, like we've already mentioned. And then Max is now 36 points back. All this with 4 races remaining. Max gains a little bit of ground on the championship lead as a whole, albeit to a different driver now. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that you could look at the championship from here. I personally think that it's. I still think the Max thing is there. I think he can still pull it off, but with the way that this weekend went, I think that asking for 9 points in the last 4 races is a lot, and it was always going to be, a lot with the deficit that Max was down to be able to pull it off. But I do think that it's slightly more of a two-way title fight than it was last weekend. But that can quickly change, and it's not to count Max out, at all here. I still think that it's definitely doable for him, especially if the McLarens, get into it a little bit in one of the final 4 races, or a couple of the final 4 races. That things can, big point swings can happen, like we saw this weekend with Lando gaining so much on Oscar.
Yeah, I think we're at a point here where, Lando looks to be the favorite just with his current form and with the form of the McLaren, and just the fact that he has a lot more room for error against Max than vice versa. But I think really this next race in Brazil, I think, is going to be not necessarily the title decider, but I think it could be the most important race coming home, especially for Max. I think this is a place where we've seen some inclement weather before, and if it's a weather race, I think that massively benefits Max. We saw it last year, what he did in the weather, and that's
year,
the kind.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the kind of race where you could potentially see a massive swing. Maybe a Max win and McLaren's not even on the podium kind of race. If it's a dry race, though, it could be a 1-2 either way, and I'm not sure if that would move the needle enough. So I think really Max needs a big weekend here because a couple of the tracks coming in, especially a track like Abu Dhabi, it might be a little more McLaren oriented than what we've seen out of the Red Bull. I think Red Bull could do well in Vegas and Brazil. Those are probably Max's 2 biggest chances to gain here. So I would say this coming race, not this weekend, but the next weekend, will be massive towards that. I guess if I had to pick one driver to win it at this point, it would be Lando, given both his form and the points advantage over Max. Obviously, Oscar is right there too. I need to see one good weekend from Oscar to kind of turn it around. Even a podium, even if he loses a few more points to Lando in Brazil, but he's on the podium, I just think that would be massive for his confidence and just sort of the vibes around him, for lack of a better term, just to see a return to form here and something where he could charge on in these last 3 races and make a run back at Lando. I like Lando over Oscar for now, just with the current form he's on, and even with some inconsistencies earlier in the year, he's been so good these last few races that it feels like he's really peaking at the right time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that these these next 2 races, you're right, need to be big points gains for Max. I think that Brazil is one of Max's better tracks. I feel like I've seen him perform very well there in the past. Obviously, what we saw last year essentially decided the title fight in the end with Max's incredible drive there in Brazil. And like you said, inclement weather can really change things up. If there is a chance for that, that's going to be in the back of Lando's head at the very least, and it's definitely going to be in Max's head as well. In the opposite way of, I definitely, I did this last year. We saw what happened with Lando. Either he's going to learn from it and take that step and make a big leap and come out and put in a really good performance, or it might get to him and Max is able to capitalize and get big points there. But that's all just fantasy at this point, if there's actually going to be weather there or not. If there's not, I still like it as a Max track. I think that things can go very well for him there, but it's definitely going to be harder to get a big points spread if there's not some sort of outside factor. And then Vegas as well. Once you get past Brazil, there's really no real opportunities for weather to intervene. 3 desert tracks at the end, and you just don't really see weather be a factor at any of those. So you're right about the weather. If it is going to happen and create a big big points difference in a race, it's going to be in Brazil. But yeah, the next 2 races I think really need to be big for Max, and he needs to come away with big points. And then, the last 2 races, those tracks I think favor the McLaren much more. And he's just going to need to hope at that point for, some coming together from the McLarens, some, intra-team stuff where they go at it a little too much, and that opens the door for Max, or just the McLaren drivers, the McLaren team itself falling to the championship pressure in some way, whether it's a bad pit stop or strategy or whatever. He's going to need to hope that his experience in those situations, will be enough in those 2 races. So I think it really needs to gain big points here, get it back to maybe, probably under 20 with 2 races left, and then, hope that the pressure for the McLarens really picks up and they make some mistakes and kind of take themselves out of championship contention. And then he just slides through and is able to get his 5th.
Yeah, I agree, and I also think he could use a little bit of help here from the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes, who we've seen popping up on these podiums most weekends. I think, having a first for him and then some 4ths or 5ths for the McLarens would be big. Otherwise, he pretty much needs to be perfect from here on in, win all 4, and still probably needs a little bit of luck. Maybe with the sprint race in there as well. If he wins that, he'd be okay. But point is, he needs a lot to go right from here on out, and it's certainly not impossible. The odds still show that there's a decent chance he can win this title. It's just he really does. His next 2 weekends, or next 2 race weekends, I should say, are massive for Max, and I think that he's very capable of winning both races, which would make the last 2 weekends really something special to see a potential 3-way title fight here.
Yeah, so if he wins the next 2, and let's say Lando comes in second in both, and then comes in second in the sprint as well, mixed in there, that would be 15 points towards Max. So the gap would come down to 21, which is kind of right the number I was saying, around 20. And then you just got to kind of hope from there. So I think it's definitely possible. He's just got to go out there and keep the car headed in the direction that it's been. Mexico's a little bit of a weird track, and like we were talking about, the elevation can affect how the cars are performing. I mean, we almost had a Haas on the podium. We'll get to that later. So it's a little bit of a different track, but I think that if they keep the car in the direction it was in before Mexico, because it wasn't near where it was in Mexico where it had been before, then I do think that we'll maybe get a couple Max wins in these next 2. I think it's certainly possible, and then like we've been saying, it just kind of it's all up in the air from there. 20 points with 2 races left, yeah, it's a lot. But it's also really not that much. You just need one thing to go your way, and then it's all right there for you.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, that's what I'm hoping for. I don't any of these 3 guys winning the championship would be pretty cool to see. I don't have a bias when it comes to who actually wins, but I'd love to see Max win these next 2 races, because then you get a 3-way title fight the last 2 races, which is something that you very rarely see. I mean, this era, since 22, has been so Red Bull dominant, and then last year we kind of got a sniff of a title fight, but by the last few races, it wasn't really an issue anymore. So, yeah, I would love to see this. Would love to see this heat up, and I think there is a real chance. I mean, the odds put it at about 50-50. Not exact 50-50, but they get basically Verstappen and Norris about the same for Brazil, and we'll see if Max can pull it off, and see if he can inch a little bit closer. Also see if Oscar can make a little bit of a turnaround here, and then we'll really have a 3-way battle, and hopefully no engine failures, no other issues, anything like that, because I'd love to see these 3 duke it out to the end.
Yeah, last thing and this kind of goes back to Lando. I wonder how things change now that he's retaken the championship lead, because for the past 5-6 races, it's all been about, oh, is this Max thing actually going to happen? Is he really going to be able to come back and win this championship? Or you've been talking about what's happening with Oscar. Where's the pace gone? Why is he making all these mistakes that he wasn't making before? And you've just kind of forgotten about Lando sitting there slowly, getting closer and closer to that lead. And I wonder if the attitude changes for Lando now that he is the championship leader and more of the pressure is going to be on him, or if he's, if he's able to just keep things the way that they were mentally, and be able to withstand the new pressure that's been, added to him now that he is in the lead in the championship. Because we saw last year at times it felt like the pressure got to him a little bit, and he hasn't been in lead in the championship in so long that he hasn't had to face that pressure, and now that he is back in it, I just wonder how that's going to play out and affect him, because I think it could really make a difference when you get down to it in these last few races as well.
Yeah, I think actually he'll do a pretty decent job under pressure here. I think it's a totally different mindset when you're coming back from being basically the underdog for most of this year. I know that going into the year, Lando was thought to be the number one guy, but Oscar's had the lead in this championship for so long. Lando's been fighting back for the vast majority of the season. I think it's a lot easier to just carry over that mentality for only the last few races. I think if he was going into summer break with the lead, that's a lot of time to sit on it and think on it, and that might have been something that has been plaguing Oscar since the summer break. But now you've got such little time left, only 4 races. There's not a lot of time to think and stew on this. You kind of just have to keep your foot to the ground and go for it. So I think actually he'll do better under pressure than he has in the past in F1, and I think there's a real chance that he can keep this momentum going. Just a few more races here, and realistically, if you look at it, his 2 opponents, Oscar has been struggling so much since summer break. The Lando's got all the momentum on his side there, and we talk every week about Max and how great he is, but Lando does have a pretty significant points advantage there. So I think that he can certainly get into the mindset of like, all right, if I go out and do my thing just for 4 more races, I can be a champion. So I'm not overly worried about Lando from that perspective. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, but it's not. Right now, I don't think it's something that's gonna take over and cause him to lose out on this championship.
Yeah, for sure. I hope that he's able to withstand it too, because I think that'll be best for the championship as well. Just with the points margin the way it is, I'd rather not see any of these guys fold up under the pressure, because the best way for the championship to be decided is for all these guys to be, clicking on all cylinders at this point. 1 point between the 2 championship leaders with 4 races left, and then Max as well, right there, 36 points behind, still fighting with a chance. Let's move on to probably the second biggest story from the race, maybe the third, but I think it was a big deal. At the end, the decision to bring out the virtual safety car with a couple of laps left. You had 2 major battles on track. You had Piastri running down at Behrman, and you had Verstappen running down Leclerc. Both of those guys had a good chance at maybe getting the pass done if the race doesn't end under VSC like it did. Well, I guess it didn't end under VSC. They went back racing, but by that point, all the good passing opportunities were gone. So it essentially ended under VSC. To me, just the way it happened, it was definitely disappointing, because Carlos, he goes off, he spins, he gets out of the way very well, parks the car behind the walls, out of the way of anybody. And on top of that, it is one of the slowest portions of track in F1. Probably only the hairpin in Monaco is, a slower area of track than what the stadium section in Mexico. So it's a very slow portion of the track, and he's gotten the car sufficiently out of the way. There's really no reason to throw the VSC there, and it's a shame because you had two battles on track that were, although they weren't battling directly the people for the championship, they had major championship implications, because if Piastri's able to get a couple more points there, he's still in the championship lead. If Verstappen's able to get a couple more points or a few more points there, it's down to 33 in the end. And, at this point, every point is going to make a difference. So it was a shame because I don't think the VSC was necessary, but and it also was part of the reason that the race ended it was a great race in my opinion, and it ended in not a very great fashion, in a dull fashion actually, and was kind of a downer for what had been such a good race up to that point.
Yeah, this was kind of a confounding choice. I think a lot of it, why it was so confusing, was the timing. We saw it on the screens, the double yellows going for a while, and then they finally decided to throw the VSC so late on. With how quickly they got it cleaned up, it looked like we could have gotten at least a full lap of racing there at the end instead of a half a lap. Maybe something like that would have been much better. I'm usually safety first, and obviously I think we're going to talk later about the Lawson incident. That's definitely the kind of thing where safety first, absolutely, all the way. Whether it's drivers or people who work at the track, marshals, anyone. But for me, I think it was just confusing. Not terrible in that I'm always pro safety, but it just felt like it could have been handled better and could have been made for a better racing product at the end if we gotten even just one full lap of racing there instead of a kind of a confusing, maybe thinking the race is over and then no, we're getting a half a lap, and it just didn't really satisfy either criteria of being best for safety or for the product. It kind of just ended up in a middle ground that was kind of confusing and led to a disappointing end of the race.
Yeah, I'm sitting there just thinking, what is happening with this safety car, this virtual safety car? Why are we throwing this now? Like you said, we had the double waved yellows in that sector for a couple laps already. The cars had already gone through there. By that point, Carlos is already out of the way, and then you decide to throw the VSC. And I think, like you mentioned, we're going to talk about the Lawson thing, and I think we could talk about that now, because I do wonder if that is part of why they decided to throw the VSC in the end, is because they were overreacting to what happened earlier in the race with the marshals being on track. They didn't want to have another similar situation, 2 in 1 race. That would obviously A, look really bad, and B, be unsafe if they were to do that. But in this instance, it wasn't in an unsafe spot. I think it was, it seems like everyone in the F1 community agrees that it was in a safe spot. The car was away from where the drivers were, that no one was going to get hurt in that situation. So it was really just the way that they handled it. I think deep down that it was just an overreaction to what happened earlier in the race with Lawson, but I don't think that they needed to overreact in this sense, because it's not like they were sending marshals literally out onto the track surface. And on top of that, the car seemed to be in a safe place, and it was in a very slow corner where it's very unlikely that anything major happens. So, yeah, it was just a really confusing situation for me, and a shame, because I think that we were in for a great finish to a race that was won by 30 seconds. You wouldn't think that we would be so upset about a VSC near the end of the race, but it did have really big implications in the end, having the VSC there.
It did, yeah. Like you mentioned, massive championship implications. implications for not only that, but also further down the line, it ends up kind of positively benefiting a team like Haas. But Haas is competing with a number
Mhm.
of other teams in the midfield for important point
Yeah.
spots. So yeah, that's kind of the biggest issue here. Is it really benefited no one in the sense that it just was kind of pointless given the timing. Would have loved to have just seen it thrown immediately. You see a car stopped on track, just get it out immediately, get
Mhm.
it over with, and then we can have a nice run to the end there. Or just totally let it go. If you say that part of the track is fine, as long as Sainz stays in the car, we're not going to have any issues, then that's perfect. Then just let them go to the end. But
Mhm.
instead, we got the middle ground, and it affected pretty much every team in some way, and it was definitely frustrating for the viewers as well.
Yeah, one thing that I just thought of, I'm not blaming Carlos by any means. I think he did the right thing, but he wasn't that far away from the pit lane. I'm not sure exactly how messed up the car was in that situation, but I feel like he probably would have been able to get it to the pit lane. So I think that probably would have negated any of this as well, this conversation. Not I'm not blaming him because I still think he did the right thing, but um, if he does get back to the pit lane, and I think he would have been able to, then I don't think that we're in this kind of situation as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's tough to know without seeing the car and knowing all of the data, kind of how that would have played out. But certainly would have made things a little bit better there at the end. Would have been nice to just see him get in the pits and everybody kind of be able to finish the race normally.
Yeah, but the other thing that the counter to that would be if he does have a lot of damage, maybe he drags debris across the racing line, and then we end up in the same situation anyways, or they have to go out and put marshals on track to pick it up. And we saw how that went earlier in the race with the Lawson thing. So I think I don't know if he was thinking that far into it of I don't want to put people back out on track, but I do think he ultimately did the right thing and just pulling off. I feel like that's what you're told to do is just pull off at the nearest area if you think you can't make it back to the pit lane, and that's the decision he made. So I'm cool with it. Um, and this may be a bad take. I'm not even sure if it's a take, but I do. I've been I've thought about this for a while. Do you think it's even like necessary to have VSCs? Do you or should we just have safety cars and or green flags or just sector yellows where people slow down in just the sector and the rest of the track is clear? Like I don't feel like we really need VSCs at all, in my opinion. And I feel like no one ever ends up staying where they were before the VSC. Like the whole point is to keep the margin to where everybody was, and everybody's going uh, they have the mandated speed on track. And yet I feel like we've seen huge gains in margins there, where guys have somehow gained 2-3 seconds in the margin during a virtual safety car. And I feel like that's kind of counterintuitive to what we're doing at that point. Just bunch them all back up and go, or just have a sector yellow until we can clear that out.
Yeah, I would say generally the VSC is not needed. Sometimes it gets deployed, and I feel like a normal safety car would not only be more sensible, but it would be more entertaining at times as well, seeing those restarts off the safety car and back into turn one. Um, I think for me, the bigger thing is, moments like these, we wouldn't have gotten any racing. I'm sure at the end there, if we would have had to take the time
Yeah.
to get everybody back sorted under a safety car. So I do think that it could be used potentially in a pinch like this. So I don't really have an issue with something like virtual safety car in a moment like this. It's just that I wish it would have been deployed a little bit earlier and more sensibly so that we could have had a better finish.
Mhm. That is a good point. It does save some racing laps in the end. not having to go through the whole safety car process. But sometimes it just feels like it doesn't really serve the purpose that it's there to serve. And that's just kind of my random thought on it. Moving to the penalties for Lewis Hamilton, he starts off has a pretty good weekend for him this year, starting P3 on the grid. You think maybe he's able to get the slipstream and make some move into turn one. He was already mentioning that after qualifying on Saturday, and the race goes pretty haywire for him pretty quickly. Gets into a little spat on track with guess who? Max Verstappen. Hamilton and Verstappen back at it again. Those two just seem to have a magnet to each other. And Lewis is the one who ends up getting a 10-second penalty, leaving the track and gaining an advantage. There was a lot that went into that because there was multiple instances before the Lewis one where Verstappen or others had gone off the track and got back on. There were no penalties there. Granted, Max, when he did go off, he gave the position back to the guys he passed in that turn one thing on lap one. It was definitely hard for the stewards at the beginning of that race because it just seemed like everything was happening. They had to figure it all out pretty quickly. And ultimately, Lewis gets a 10-second penalty, and he seems pretty aggrieved about it after the race. But I didn't know what your thoughts were on the 10-second penalty for Lewis, if you thought that was fair or a little bit too extreme, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the 10 seconds it was kind of harsh. I think, he maybe gains a second or two there, but a 10-second penalty to combat that's a little bit harsh. I understand the penalty. The rules are the rules, and he did kind of cut that corner off as far as not following the safety road. So, I understand the penalty. I think 10 seconds is a little harsh, but I think also, the issue is the likes of Max not getting a penalty, and then even Charles cutting corners on lap one and not having any kind of repercussions either. I think it just was kind of an unfairly judged race. I know that lap one you get a little more leniency, and that's understandable. That's on some level that's the way it should be, but it was kind of a confounding weekend for that, for the way the race was judged, and not the best really from the FIA there as far as picking who give penalties to and what for. Just a really confusing weekend.
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion on. I guess 10 seconds does seem a little bit harsh, but also he did get a pretty significant advantage over Verstappen and Behrman there by getting out ahead of that battle that really went off right after that in the following corners, and he was able to pull away from those two. Grant, I think Hamilton probably should have just tried to concede the position back later on in that lap and avoid any penalty there. I think that usually that's the sensible thing to tell your drivers to do, is to just give the position back and then, recharge and go after the fight again, just because these penalties can be a lot harsher than just giving the position right back real quick. You lose out a lot more time and a lot more positions in the end than you would by doing that. I know also Behrman and Verstappen were literally side by side right after this, so it might have been hard to give the position back to Max and not lose it to Ollie there. There's a lot that goes into making that decision. But I just think it's usually easier to just give the position back when you know that there's a good chance that you're going to get called on something like that and not risk the 10-second, 5-second penalty, whatever it is, that I feel like is a lot more damaging to your race in the long term than what would be if you just gave it back.
Yeah, and see, that's kind of the greater issue there with it, in my opinion, is, Behrman gets ahead of Verstappen there for a little bit, so you can't give the position back to Max without giving back another position. I think if
Yeah.
he was able to give the position back, I think he probably would have. But the issue is now, because Behrman's also passed Verstappen,
Hmm.
now he ends up with a harsher penalty with the 10 seconds. I know that
Yeah.
the rule is 10 seconds, and it is what it is. I'm just saying, I feel like it would have been a little more fair for a 5-second penalty there, and
Hmm.
Lewis would have been penalized for what is a penalty, but not so much so that it pushes him all the way back to effective 8th place. I think when, if he had taken a normal off road, he certainly wouldn't have been in 8th place.
Yeah, I think that's really fair because you're right. When Ollie gets passed, you're not going to tell your driver to give up 2 positions, especially one that you weren't really battling with that guy at the time for that spot. So, yeah, I think that's fair, a fair judgment, and also, um, it's just a really difficult position when you're put in those spots because you're trying to decide, make all these decisions on track during a race, and then it just gets tricky with when you do get a car between uh, and trying to make that decision. But I think you try and run away and get the 10 seconds back another way, and Lewis wasn't able to do that either. Just I feel like the car got some damage in that battle that affected him because he was a lot different than he was the rest of the weekend after that. Just felt like he was real. But now moving to personal podiums for the Mexico Grand Prix. In my first spot, I have Lando Norris. Felt like it was hard to go any other direction. There was a strong case for my number 2 to be number 1, but when you win by 30 seconds and you have the margin for pole that he had, I feel like it's hard to give it to anyone else. So to me, it had to be Lando in number 1, but I could also see the case for another guy here. But I'm not sure if you went with the same number 1 or if you went a different direction.
No, I'm in the same boat. I mean, I think we're going to have the same one too, and I think most people would. But I've got Lando number 1 here as well. Just if it was a 2-second or a 5-second win, I think there's a great argument for the guy that we're going to have second instead. But a 30-second dominant win, especially given the pressure of the championship, the moment he finds himself in, just a phenomenal weekend all around, qualifying, race, everything. You couldn't do any more, couldn't ask for any more from Lando this weekend. So that's why I've given him in the edge and putting him first.
Yeah, and to regain the championship lead as well, I think that plays a big part of it too. In second, I have Ollie Behrman, personal best finish in his F1 career of 4th. It just really, in my opinion, he really held his own in that race, battling with some of the best guys in some of the best cars in the series. Up front, I don't think he made any mistakes really, in my opinion. The only mistake I think would have been maybe the decision to follow what the others were doing with the 2-stop and not go for the 1-stop. I think Max probably runs him down in the end on the 1-stop, but I think you give yourself a better chance in just keeping yourself in third on track and not having to go through that whole process of maybe another bad pit stop or fighting to the field or whatever. So that'd be the only thing that I think held him back from the podium was strategy, and that's not his fault. I think his driving was incredible. And it had been weird because I feel like Ollie's done pretty well this season, but just hasn't got the points to show for it. He was down in 18th in the standings before this race. And I felt like it was, kind of an under the radar season. I feel like he's been driving pretty solid. Just things haven't really been going his way, but a really good finish here for him, finishing 4th in Mexico.
Yeah, this was obviously who I was alluding to. Kind of a slam dunk here to put Ollie second, a best drive of his career so far. I thought to this point his best drive was filling in Saudi Arabia for Ferrari. even though it wouldn't have
Mhm.
been a spectacular performance if it was Carlos or or Charles or someone. I think just the poise he showed stepping into a Ferrari in a moment's notice and doing
Mhm.
so well really impressed me. But this weekend, eclipses that. Just a fantastic start, sorting through the madness at the start and managing to gain a few positions there. And then the poise he showed, just holding off the likes of Piastri at the end. Obviously, Mercedes had their inner team struggles, but also held off both the Mercedes coming down the stretch there. Very impressive. It would have been easy. A Haas up in fourth, fighting for a podium. A lot of times you have seen him kind of slowly fall down the order throughout the race, and Ollie
Mhm.
held his own up there and really looked fantastic. So credit to him, and he really deserved a result like this because we talked earlier on about how he didn't seem like he was having that bad of a season, but he was effectively dead last out of drivers that completed the whole year, just with the way he just finished so many races just outside the points and whatnot. So he deserved a moment like this, and I think it kind of the standings more fairly show kind of what his season has been now with this weekend behind him.
Yeah, I agree. I'm happy for Ollie. I think he's one of the better young drivers that we have right now, and this kind of result I feel at least was deserved. For him and for Haas as well. They've been better this year than I think I was expecting. As a team too. So good for them, and another good result for Ollie. Kind of building a really nice young career so far in F1. In third, rounding out my podium, I have Max Verstappen. Still gained points on the championship lead when strategy in the car just didn't seem to be what we had seen in the past few weeks from Red Bull. And yeah, I mean, it obviously wasn't his best weekend, but also you looked like it might have been going south when he did stay out longer early on and kind of take the pain there. And ultimately he was going to have to fight through that traffic or have those guys do the two stop that they did. And then that last stint, obviously his engineers were very impressed with it. I thought it was a very impressive stint as well on those softs to gain that ground, but also keep those tires there on those softs a long stint like that. And in my opinion, I think he would have had a good chance on Charles if the VSC doesn't happen. It would have been hard. It would have been a difficult pass, but I feel like he might have been able to get that done. So, could have been a second, but it was a third, and I think it was a pretty solid weekend for him. In terms of the championship, I think he might have needed a little bit more, but I think he got everything out of the car that he could have in the Grand Prix.
Yeah, I think honestly this was a tough weekend to find a guy for third, in my opinion, because there were two performances that were so great. And then looking down the board, you had a lot of guys who had disappointing weekends. You had other guys who finished well, but we talked about earlier, maybe got away with some stuff on track as far as penalties and whatnot. So it was a tough one for me. I think Max overall had a great weekend as far as the championship and everything. Certainly had some great moments in the race. For me, though, I'm going to go further down the board. I'm going to go with Gabriel Bortoleto. Started the race in 16th and fought his way up for a point. Gets a little help from a couple guys in front of him. Bowing out of this race, but this is not an easy track to make up ground on, especially after lap one. Never been one of the easier tracks to pass on, especially with the exception of the long straight. And he had a really solid weekend, coming off of a couple bad weekends too. In Austin and in Singapore, 17th and 18th. Not his best run recently, but back in the points here, kind of refining the form he had late in the summer. And just a really exciting time for the rookies all around. Two rookies on my personal podium, and
Mhm.
not to mention the Hajar, Antonelli, all those guys. So, yeah, it's a great time for the rookies, and went a little off the board here. Just shout someone else out and gone with Bortoletto for third for me.
No, I like that. He's a really good talent. I think he's done exceeded expectations for me this year. And it was really mostly just because he was in a Sauber that I didn't think was going to be very good. And both him and Hulkenberg have been really good this season, but he's definitely exceeded expectations for me. And then I also got to add a little bit of an honorable mention category for my personal podium. Not necessarily a driver for their performance on track, but I think you got to give it to Russell's radio this weekend was just pure class. It was peak George on the radio. It was incredible to listen to, and at one point, I mean, you're kind of really tuned into that at a certain point in the race, and not even what's going on in the race, just because of how good the radio was from George back to the pit wall. I mean, it was some of the best we've heard in a really long time, and I feel like George is, I feel like George is a little bit of, I mean, he gets his due on the radio for the crikeys and all of that, but I feel like he might still be a little bit underrated for how good some of the radio is that Russell's putting out there, and this weekend was some of his best in my opinion.
Yeah, it was really an all-time weekend this weekend from George. I assume you saw Friday. He misses practice one for Frederick Vesti, I believe, is a rookie that filled in for him, and he goes up in the stands in the
Yeah.
mask and hangs out with the fans and watches the practice from the stands. I thought that was really cool. I'm sure drivers go incognito at times, but I don't think very many of them go
Mhm.
up into the stands like that and try and blend in. That was a cool moment. And then, yeah, this race, it's a little unfair to him because the strategy really did kind of mess with his race. I don't think he would have finished on the podium, but I think he could have at least, made a run at Piastri and Behrman and those guys up in front of him if they had sorted out the strategy sooner. But that led to some all-time great radios, and
Mhm.
I'm sure that's frustrating to him, but as a fan, that's sometimes that's more entertaining than seeing some of the passes and everything. I mean, uh, I think this is arguably the best radio performance of the season from George, and certainly one of, I think, the better radio talents of his generation.
A couple things on the George going into the stands. I think it was it's got to be really funny to look back, be someone in that section right next to George, and just have no idea that you were sitting next to George. Like, who's this guy in the mask? What is he doing? Why is he wearing such a heavy Mercedes like jacket? Why, and it got this mask on? What's this guy doing? What's his deal? And then turns out it's George Russell sitting right next to you the whole time in FP1. And then the other thing, if I was watching FP1, and they were earlier in the uh, in the broadcast for FP1, they were discussing, showing all the guys who were sitting out that session, like Max and Lando on the pit wall, just like grinding data, going through what their guys are going through, and then just to know that George is just off on this side quest now. Like, looking back to know that George is just sitting in the stands in the stadium section in a mask, just doing his own thing. It's really funny to juxtapose like those two approaches, where one's just like, yeah, I haven't been able to watch an F1 car in a while. I'm just going to go hop in the stands and check it out. And then the other guys are just grinding in the corner over there, trying to just get every piece of data that they can.
Yeah, it really had to be something. I think he was talking to a couple of the fans up there. I think I saw a video of him coming down from the stands and talking to one of
Mm-hmm.
the fans. I assume they didn't know who he was, but that's really cool. And yeah, it definitely would have been shocking to find that out after the fact. To see a video of you talking to George, or something like that coming out of the stands. I think
Yeah.
I got to mention too. I don't know if you saw Fernando Alonso came to the track this weekend
Yeah.
with the
I was
George
gonna say
Russell
that. I
phone
was gonna talk
case.
about that.
Yeah, so that's a real triple crown this week for George. The phone case, the radios, and going into the stands and the mask is really something special.
Oh, I
And
thought
go ahead.
I thought you were gonna talk about Fernando's mask before the race
Oh
on
yeah,
Sunday. Did you see that?
yeah. Those two, they're not
Yeah.
exactly. They're a funny friendship, certainly.
Yeah.
Two guys that outside of racing, I don't know what they have in common, but
Yeah.
they're certainly get along very well. So that's awesome to see. But yeah, quite the weekend for George, and yeah, that's really about as memorable of a weekend as you can have and not be on the podium.
Yeah, I think everybody wanted, all the drivers wanted pictures with Fernando in that in that mask before the race. It was just he's so funny, man. He's so like weird and out there, and just like I would not expect him to like have that side of humor that he has, but it's just like I don't know how the man understands like the young like meme culture, but he does. He just posts these TikToks and stupid stuff all the time. It's really good stuff. I think Fernando's really underrated in that. I mean, he is a rookie, so he's one of the U's. I guess he's just kind of in that culture right now.
Yeah, they should have done. I know they had the rookie roundtables before the season. They should have done one of those with Fernando in there. It would have been funny just seeing like been like a grandpa to them almost.
The rookie class.
Yeah, exactly. Seeing the dialogue back and forth there. Maybe an idea for next year.
Yeah, I think you need to bring him on. I don't know how big the rookie class is going to be next year. It might be a
I
class
was
of
gonna say,
one.
yeah, it might just be him and Lindblad, I guess,
Yeah,
a one-on-one conversation. But
yeah,
just bring these guys back and let them be rookies again.
yeah. More of a tutoring session than a whole classroom situation. Let's go to stinker of the week and wrap things up here from Mexico City. To me, I am going to go with the FIA. Between the VSC situation, but and the Marshall situation as well. I'm not sure if they have like I'm not sure exactly how the Marshall like thing works in terms of when who's the person that tells you to go out and clean up certain spots, or if it's a lot of just they tell you the stuff before the race, and then if you see it and you're told to do so, you go do it. But you can't have guys just running on track right feet in front of an F1 car. It's at this point in 2025 in F1, I feel like we should be past making those mistakes. So yeah, I think for a few reasons the FIA, and also I know that they had a lot to handle with the way that the first few laps went, but the penalty situation, just feel like there was a lot going on for them this weekend and hard for them to handle all of it. So to me, in the end, went with the FIA for my stinker of the week.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Personally, I think the Lawson situation was a near disaster. I mean, luckily he wasn't
Mhm.
going full speed, but that certainly still could have ended very differently and potentially tragically there. So, um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really really no excuse for that. And then we've already mentioned the science safety car incident, and we mentioned uh, all the inconsistency with penalties and everything. So just really, I don't think it's been terrible all year, but this race specifically was especially poor from the FIA. Um, for me personally, just to not go with the same one twice, and because I think this guy's going to be, kind of the first guy in mind for a lot of people as well. I'm going to go with Oscar. Just
Okay.
a big weekend for
Yeah.
a massive swing there. When his teammate has all the pace in the world, um, and looks so dominant on the weekend, to see him be 6 tenths behind in qualifying, and then in the race over 40 seconds behind Lando. It's pretty shocking. And in the media, the way Oscar was talking off the race, it seems like there's just something different, some sort of feel with the car that he's not getting, at least publicly saying that his confidence isn't shaken. But since the break, I mean, it's really been quite a turn for Oscar. And so maybe this isn't just a this weekend kind of thing, but I think this weekend compounded with everything that we've seen in the last few races, to feel like he was so in charge in this championship and watch it slip away like this. He showed some fight and showed some grit to gain a couple spots, but he's still, finishing behind a Haas and finishing off the podium this weekend is kind of a disaster for Oscar, given that both his title challengers, contenders, made up points on him.
Yeah, I was thinking about going Oscar. I think the only reason I didn't is because I went with Oscar last week, and I just didn't want to do it back to back. But the only other guy that I could think of to throw in there, I'm sure there's others, but the other one that stands out to me would be Carlos. He had a good qualifying, put it actually ahead of Piastri, and then he had a penalty he had to serve, 5-place penalty, so he goes back. And then in the race, he has a 5-second penalty for I think speeding in the pit lane. And then at the end, he's the one who brings out the VSC spinning there in the stadium section. So just kind of a weekend that seemed like it was going in the right direction. And then everything kind of going downhill in the actual race, kind of similar to last weekend. Felt like Carlos was, the beginning of the weekend was good. He had the sprint podium, and then the Grand Prix not going his way at all, and kind of felt similar this week. That's the only other guy that really stood out to me for kind of having a stinker this weekend.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I mean, it was just kind of one of those total disaster weekends for Carlos. Felt like everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. So I think that's a great shout. He's had a nice run of form lately. Certainly kind of turned his fortunes around, but this weekend was pretty much about as bad as it can get. Given the circumstances, given what felt like it could have been a point scoring opportunity, kind of turned into a total disaster.
Yeah, it was a tough one for Carlos and Piastri as well, like you mentioned, and the FIA as a whole. Those are our stinkers of the week. And I think that's everything for this week's episode. We'll be back in a couple weeks to break down everything from Brazil. Should be a great race. It's always a great race there. Probably, honestly, like from just a pure racetrack perspective, probably my favorite on the calendar. There's some others that have, some other stuff that I like, around the track and around the event. But from a pure track, I think Interlagos might be my favorite on the calendar. So super excited for that one. We'll be there to cover everything. Should be a really good weekend. Like we kind of previewed a little bit earlier, Max needing a good weekend there, and the McLaren guys as well needing some good stuff to go their way and extend a championship lead for either of those two.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a track that we always talk about being one of, if not our favorite track. So I'm thrilled to see it. I'm thrilled to talk about it. And here's to hoping the championship gets even. I was going to say even closer. It can't get closer than 1 point, but the three drivers overall. Yeah, that's true. That's true. We have seen a tie before. But hoping that we get an even closer championship fight between the three, and we get a really thrilling last few races here.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Got to get down to Interlagos someday and check it out. That'd be a bucket list one for sure.
Yeah, I think that's top on the bucket list at this point. Maybe Silverstone or a couple others up there as well, but I can't really think of one for pure racing that I'd want to see as much as Interlagos.
Yeah, I agree. That's everything for this week. We'll be back in a couple weeks to break down everything from Brazil. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Yep. See you then.